Reports of mysterious lights in the sky and unidentified flying objects date back to the ancient Egyptians. But something happened in 1947 that would forever change the face of ufology. A civilian pilot flying over Mount Rainier saw 9 boomerang-like UFOs and described them as flying saucers. By year's end, there would be more sightings, rumors of a crash and alien bodies, and the first official acknowledgement by our government that something had to be done. If modern ufology has a birth date, it is June 24th, 1947, the day Kenneth Arnold saw 9 unidentified craft flying in formation over Mount Rainier, Washington State. Arnold, an accomplished search and rescue pilot, was shaken by his encounter. This is how he described it to a radio reporter only hours later.
I could see them only plainly when they seemed to tip their wing or whatever it was, and the sun flashed on them. They looked something like a pie plate that was cut in half. They seemed to flip and flash in the sun just like a mirror in such a way that it almost blinded you when you looked at them through your plexiglass windshield. As I kept looking at them, I kept looking for their tails. They didn't have any tails.
By timing how long it took the UFOs to fly between 2 peaks, Arnold estimated their speed to be 12 to 1,500 miles per hour, twice the speed of the fastest conventional craft of the day. And Arnold's description of the craft as flying like a saucer captivated the public and etched a new catchphrase in the UFO lexicon.
1947 marks the beginning of the UFO era. This is something that everybody agrees on. What Arnold's sighting did was to give these things a name, flying saucers, and connect them with a larger phenomenon.
Jerome Clark is the author of a comprehensive 3-volume encyclopedia that traces the timeline of the UFO phenomenon. Clark believes that Kenneth Arnold's reliable sighting was one of the most significant events in the history of ufology.
Ken Arnold was about as honest a man as they come. He had bedrock conservative Western values. He believed that a man's word was his bond, a good guy, solid citizen.
Arnold's encounter was significant for another reason. It was the first in a series of sightings by credible witnesses. The next came 2 weeks later, when Captain Emil Smith and his United Airlines crew, bound for Seattle, saw 6 disc-shaped craft. And as Arnold and Smith compared notes, more and more flying saucer sightings were reported.
The summer 1947 wave was dominated by reports of what we now call daylight discs. They looked like the product of somebody's technology. The way these things moved, their extraordinary performance characteristics, caused people to believe that some kind of extraordinary breakthrough in aviation technology had been accomplished.
But the U.S. government disclaimed any connection to the discs. So, when another major UFO sighting came to light just days after the United event, it was Pulp magazine publisher Ray Palmer and Kenneth Arnold who initiated an investigation. On June 21st, 1947, in the waters off Maury Island, also in Washington State, Harold Dahl, his son, and 2 crew members were aboard Dahl's fishing boat when they reportedly spotted 5 or 6 donut-shaped objects.
One of the UFO appeared, from their point of view, to perhaps be having mechanical problems. It was coming down in this falling leaf fashion. When the UFO got down closer to the water, a second UFO approached it. It touched it as if to jumpstart, perhaps. When it jump-started, the first UFO, the one that had been in trouble, dropped some residue. Then all of the craft took off into the sky and disappeared.
When Kenneth Arnold arrived to investigate the Maury Island UFO event, Harold Dahl said he had fragments of crash wreckage, and he had a partner, Fred Chrisman, a man whose contribution to ufology is considered dubious at best.
Fred Chrisman was a guy who had shown up earlier as a teller of tall tales. For example, 2 or 3 years earlier, he had written Ray Palmer, who was the editor of a couple of science fiction magazines, and told him that when he was in Burma during World War II, he had encountered malevolent humanoid creatures and had a machine gun fight with them and had to fight his way out of the cave.
But while public doubt was being cast on Chrisman, Arnold was working behind the scenes with Air Force intelligence officers.
At this point, Dahl apparently became frightened that they were going to get into trouble, whereas Chrisman, who was a more experienced spinner of yarns, thought maybe here was a real opportunity to make some money, to tell a big tale and let it fly. And if he could get it endorsed by the U.S. Air Force, all the better.
That plan was never put into action. When officers Davidson and Brown wrapped up their investigation, they took their research, boarded an Air Force transport, and died minutes later in a fiery crash.
The Air Force concluded, and so did several local newspaper reporters, that this story began not as a well-thought-out hoax, but just as a joke, which was to be played on Ray Palmer, the magazine editor. And it was, of course, inspired by all the UFO sightings that were happening during the summer of 1947.
Maury Island may be most famous today as a great UFO hoax, but there were other witnesses on the water that day, and Halberter has interviewed one man who did not go public.
Barney Leroy saw the same donut shapes. Barney Leroy saw the UFO and the falling leaf pattern. And Barney Leroy saw the jump start.
Barney Leroy, a local fisherman and a minister, passed away in 1980. But Sightings found Barney's brother Bob, who recounted this little-known side of the Maury Island story.
He said, Bob, one of these discs looked like it was going to crash right near his boat, right over here, maybe 100 yards from the sighting. And he said that another one suddenly came down over the woods and over the trees and touched it. Didn't crash into it, but touched it just enough to give it life, vim, vigor, and vitality.
Is Maury Island the birthplace of ufology's seamy side? Or was it an oracle for future events that would take the world by storm less than 2 weeks later? We may never know. But what is known is that within a matter of months, the Air Force created the top-secret Project Sign to investigate reports of UFOs. And all of the believability and doubt, all of the clever hoaxes and hard evidence that surround the study of UFOs today can all be traced back to one 3-week period in the summer of 1947.
I did see it, and I did clock it, and it's just as much a mystery to me as it is to everyone else who's been calling me the last 24 hours wondering what it was.
The incident at Maury Island is also important because it marked the first sighting of MIBs, the so-called Men in Black. And whether or not Harold Dahl's claims were real, the fallout from his disclosure certainly was. By the 1950s, mysterious G-men wearing black fedoras and driving black sedans were a permanent part of the UFO landscape.